Thank you to Tim for letting me speak tonight. This is a story that I've been wanting to kind of share with people over the past few weeks, and it's good. This is a really good opportunity for me to do that tonight, so thank you, Tim. It's a story about piecing a story together. So this is my journey over the past couple of years of learning about a piece of family history. And it starts with my dear old grandmother, who is there in the audience. So my grandmother was born Jasmine Alexander on the 19th of October 1932 in Durban, in Durban, South Africa. She was the only member of her family to migrate to England in the late 50s when she was training to be a nurse, and she's been in England ever since. My grandmother's great-grandfather was this man on the right, Richard Alexander. Richard Alexander was also born in England in 1841. He was born in Colchester but raised in Suffolk, and at the age of 17 he enlisted himself in the British Army, and by the age of 23 he was the youngest ever regimental sergeant major in British Army history. Really respected person, a proud member of our family. The lady on the right is his second wife, Jane Alexander. Jane Alexander, also born in England, and married Richard in the early 1890s, and like I said, it was his second wife. During Richard's 30s, when he was 35 years old, he was asked, due to him being well respected within the army, he was asked to take on quite an important role, and that role was Chief of Police for Durban Police Force in South Africa. He ended up staying in that role for 30 years, from 1876 to 1906. The lady on his right was also very well respected within the community, campaigning for equal rights in South Africa in the 1890s and the early 1900s. It was a very complex time in South Africa, but both of these people had quite important roles within the community, and from what I can gather, were well respected and well liked. Growing up, I'd also always hear stories about South Africa, always drawn to them, and always quite eager to hear what my grandmother would share, as well as members of the family coming over from South Africa to England. I was always quite eager to talk to them and listen to them. There was one story that always stuck with us, and that was that Richard Alexander and Jane Alexander saved Gandhi's life. So Gandhi was in South Africa for 23 years, from the early 1900s. During that time, he faced discrimination immediately. As you know, there's a famous incident where he was kicked off the train in Pietermaritzburg. And that was his first experience in South Africa, immediately being discriminated against. Gandhi beforehand was training to be a lawyer in London. So he went from India to London and then to South Africa. So he kind of had his background and knowledge was different to other people in South Africa, and he felt that he needed to do something and stand up against the inequality, the hate and discrimination against Indian people in South Africa at the time. The thing is, for all these years, up until a couple of years ago, we didn't know much more about the story. All we knew was that Richard and Jane saved Gandhi's life. For whatever reason, me and my family, we knew about it, but we didn't really know how to look into it, how to research it. It was just more of a story that we would share every now and then. But that was it, we didn't know much else. And we was happy with that, I suppose. There was no real way of us learning about it, apart from some family members in South Africa. So 2 years ago, with this in mind, I decided to travel to Durban. It wasn't necessarily for me to research the story, it was more because I needed a holiday and I always wanted to go to South Africa. So I travelled there by myself for 2 weeks in October 2017. But always in the back of my mind thinking, if I get the opportunity, I'm going to try and research the story further. I was always curious, and I thought I'd go there open-minded and see what happens. So I arrived, and for the first week or so, I was a tourist, just a holiday maker. I went to Shishluri Game Reserve, had an encounter with an elephant, went to the Valley of 1,000 Hills, and even jumped off the highest bungee swing in the world, which is Guinness certified, which I still kind of can't believe I'd done, really, to be honest, and nor can my mum when I told her after I'd done it. After a few days, I thought to myself, okay, I'm here, I'm in Durban, how can I try and find out more about this story? What happened? What triggered the event to happen? Why did it happen? What happened after? Is there any way of me trying to learn more about the story now that I'm here? So after a few days, I decided to take a trip to the Gandhi Museum, which ended up being much more than a museum. The Gandhi Museum is actually the Phoenix settlement in Durban, South Africa. Gandhi created and developed the Phoenix settlement in 1904. He wanted to create a multi-faith community where it would be self-sufficient, there'd be education there, there'd be opportunity for people to kind of share their grievances with him so he can act on their behalf and try and improve the social issues in South Africa at the time. It was essentially an ashram. And during the apartheid in the 1970s, it got burnt down. But when I was there, the house behind me on the left there is actually a rebuild of his original house. So I decided to go there. I jumped in an Uber, drove to the Phoenix settlement, and drove about 30 minutes outside of Durban and through a township, up a hill to a gated kind of compound, went into the Phoenix settlement. No one was there. I got out in the Uber driver was even saying to me, "Are you sure you want to come here? Have you been here before?" I was like, "I think so, just take me there and we'll see what happens." So I got out of the car, and immediately I was greeted by this man, Bunani, who is the guide of the Phoenix settlement, and a really interesting person to know that I've stayed friends with since. So I got out of the car, and he welcomed me and introduced himself, and he said, "What is your name?" And I said, "My name is Jake Alexander." And immediately he went, "Alexander, Alexander." I got goosebumps straight away. And I said, just on the chance, I said, "I'm the great-great-great-grandson of Richard Alexander." "Ah, Mr. Alexander," he says, and greets me. It's like, "Oh, you must, so happy for you to be here. Incredible." And I was just blown away immediately. And I was like, "You know the story?" He's like, "Of course I know the story. Come," and showed me around the Phoenix settlement, told me a bit more about the story, so I was starting to piece it together. And then at the end of the tour, he said to me, "You must meet Ella Gandhi." And I said to him, "Ella Gandhi?" And he was like, "Ella, it's Gandhi's granddaughter. She lives here in Durban. I will call her now." And I thought, this is escalating quite quickly. Like, half hour ago, I was just kind of happy just to be here again, tourist, curious, and see what I might find. And now I'm potentially going to be speaking to Mahatma Gandhi's granddaughter on the phone. Again, I thought, okay, I'm going to be open-minded. He rang her, she didn't answer. So he said, "Okay, I'll give you her email." And I was like, "Okay, I'll email her." He's like, "You promise me you will email her, she will be really excited to speak to you." So I did. I emailed her, and she didn't reply for a few days. But when she did reply, it was probably one of the most overwhelming, welcoming emails I've ever had. And it was immediately like we connected. She said, "So happy to hear from you. It's amazing that the Alexander and Gandhi family can connect again." And again, just blowing my mind with this information. Just this guy from Hastings kind of going through this experience. And she said, "You have to come and see me." So she gave me her address and her phone number, and we arranged to meet on the 10th of October 2017, which also happened to be my birthday. So there I was in Ella Gandhi's humble apartment in Durban, floor 15 of a tower block overlooking Durban. Outside, it was the worst storm Durban had seen in 100 years. Gale force winds, floods everywhere. It was just, outside it was chaos, inside was this really humbling experience that I was going through. And I sat opposite Ella on her dining table, and we had the most incredible conversation for hours and hours. I'm a social worker, she's a trained social worker, so we connected on that immediately. She told me about her awful experiences that her and her family have gone through during the apartheid and during their struggle there. Her son was assassinated during that time, and she was crying when she was telling me this. She spoke about her time in the ANC, and when she knew Nelson Mandela, and she was part of the group that met with Nelson Mandela upon his release from prison. All these incredible things. I was just like, it was the most surreal moment for me, but also the most kind of incredible, beautiful conversation that I've ever had. And she shared with me this book, which is a history of Durban City Police, which has 2 chapters solely dedicated to Richard Alexander. And again, I was like, this is all information in front of me that me and my family in Hastings just aren't aware of. There's books published, like loads of people know the story in South Africa, which I found out. And it's actually an incredible read, and it's very positive kind of account of Richard Alexander and his ties. 30 years as Chief of Police. You've got to understand, this is a really complex time. It's like the Wild West at that time in Durban. Durban was an up-and-coming city in South Africa, but obviously with colonial rule, with a mix of kind of race and communities there. There was many Indian people there was African people, Zulus, and the account within here is very detailed, and it says that how much Richard was actually respected by all communities in Durban, and that was reassuring for me, because obviously kind of wanted to scratch the surface of that time in Southern Africa. You're not really too sure what to find, and it may be that why me and my family kind of just never really thought of exploring it before, because I wasn't too sure what we'd really find. But actually it was a really positive account. And Ella spoke about the incident with Richard, Jane and Gandhi, and she said to me that actually they did indeed save his life, and that her and her family would always be grateful for that, and to the family for that. Again, just, I was close to tears myself, and it was just a moment that I would never forget. I still wasn't fully happy with not knowing the full story though. There were some questions that Ella couldn't really answer, and I didn't really want to pry too much as well. Again, I went with an open mind and just thought what I learned, it will be interesting and I can share it with my family, and I'm happy with that. So I come back to England in late October 2017 after my 2 weeks in South Africa, and kind of sat on that information for a good 10 months or so. Then in September 2018, I thought I'd email Ella. So I sent her an email which kind of summarised my year with my work, some family updates, spoke about some challenges that I was facing at that time. It's been a transitional period with my job. I had some struggles myself with my friend not being very well, my granddad. But I always in the back of my head thought, I want to go back to South Africa, and if I do, I'm going to connect with Ella again. So Ella replied, and she said this on the right, which has always kind of stuck with me and just kind of sums up Ella really. She's the most humbling person and very insightful, and everything she says or shares with someone has meaning, and that really stuck with me. Social work has its rewards and sad moments, but the satisfaction you get from working with people and helping them in a small but meaningful way gives purpose to life, and I just thought that was worth sharing tonight. But also, part of the email said about the 150th anniversary of Gandhi and his wife Kasturba Gandhi, and the fact they're potentially planning a conference to commemorate this. And she sent me details and we finalised it. So again, I was like, okay, say yes, Jake. Don't get anxious and don't kind of put this to the side. Try and go to that conference. So I replied and said, Ella, let me know. Any more information, I'll be more than happy to be involved. A few months had passed, there wasn't really much contact. I shared what potentially was happening with my family, and then earlier on this year, she emailed me with details asking me to write a paper to present at the conference. a paper on the incident that had happened. I agreed, but I also thought, I'm going to need to research this more. So I couldn't go to the conference with kind of this hot-hold story. I thought, who knows who's going to be there? There'll be people that probably know the story. I need to research this. So I did. I spent a few months rereading the history of Durban police, reading cuttings from newspapers of the time, which I got from the Durban Museum, and I read the Gandhi autobiography, the story of my experiments with truth. With all this in mind, and with my research, I felt confident enough to go back to Durban and share what I now know about the story. I wrote my paper, sent it to Ella. She was really happy with it. Got some more information around the conference, and then 7 weeks ago, I think it was 7 weeks? Yeah, 7 weeks ago, I found myself back at the Phoenix settlement. And this is the conference brochure on the right. There was 40 delegates from various countries around the world, including Bernard Lafayette, who was key in the civil rights movement in America and was a friend of Martin Luther King. Charles Alvin, who was Coretta King's bodyguard, Martin Luther King's wife. Yaru Sharef Eddin, who's a Somalian peace activist, who is currently living in exile in Cardiff. Koju Edu, a Ghanaian professor who lectures at the university in Ghana where the Gandhi statue got taken down. He's actually campaigning for the Gandhi statue to be reinstated. And Anuradha Shankar, who is an Indian police commissioner. There was also people from other African countries, quite a few delegates from India, and me from England. So that is me looking quite goofy in the top corner with Bernard Lafayette and Ella and Christian Morty, who we've become quite good friends with. There is Charles Alvin and some other delegates from India in the right. This picture here is in the final hour of the 4-day conference. It went on for 4 days, but all the delegates also stayed in a hotel together. So during the day there was lectures and presentations being given on various topics. The golden thread was they kind of have to be on a Gandhian ideology. Kind of some of them went off piece with that. But as you can see, it's a mix of people. That's probably really about half the people who attended, but these are like the core kind of group of people that were there 4 days, every presentation, including myself. And I found myself listening intuitively and best I can to everyone that spoke. Didn't always understand, but I had an eagerness to learn. I asked questions. I was able to also share a lot about kind of the political landscape in England at the moment, some social challenges that we face as a country through my own work as well. So I felt I was quite received there really, and people seemed to respond well to me. It wasn't until the first night of the conference, so we had a meet and greet at the hotel, and the lady there is Anu, who is an Indian police commissioner, and I told her about who I was when she asked me. I said, my name's Jake Alexander. Immediately she cried and said, the story is the reason why she got into police commissioning. And I never really thought of the significance of that, of how some people in India kind of, their understanding of the story and the significance of that for them until I spoke to Anu. So the conference started. On the first day, I got up and I shared the story, and that story is this. In 1896, Gandhi was asked by members of the Indian community to write the Green Pamphlet. The Green Pamphlet is an account of real-life events of discrimination, racial injustice, inequality and violence towards the Indian community in South Africa at the time. It's a hard read. You can Google it now, you can download the PDF. Richard Alexander is mentioned in it. Gandhi states that he is an estimable gentleman and his hands are tied with a lot of the issues that are going on, but he does his best to protect all members of the community in Durban. This was published and shared around South Africa, India and in England. A lot of the media also picked up on it. Gandhi felt he needed to do something, and this was what he felt was best to do at the time. So the states there, May 1896. So it took a few months for it to build up traction. And during that time, Gandhi returned to India. In January 1897, he returned to South Africa, this time with his wife and children. It was the first time that his wife and children had been to South Africa. And immediately, they were greeted with this. So, people were not happy with what was published in the Green Pamphlet. As I said, it was a really complex time, a lot of tension within South Africa. People misunderstood the point of what the Green Pamphlet was and saw it as a threat towards colonials in Southern Africa. Not everyone, but people did. And they had planned to meet the boat at the dock in Durban and make threats towards Gandhi's life. People at the conference refer to it as lynching, which is obviously just horrific, but that's how they perceive it. So, if you see the boat there, Gandhi's wife and children got off the boat safely, along with other passengers. Gandhi knew what was happening, and after a period of time, he bravely walked off the boat. He was immediately attacked by members of this crowd here, to the point where he was almost beaten to death. Jane Alexander was there. She was there as an ally, not as an enemy of Gandhi. And she saw what had happened, and she bravely intervened. Obviously, she is the chief superintendent's wife. She probably knew she had the backing of police officers there. Jane had a parasail with her, opened it up, charged the crowd, made everyone disperse. No one really wanted to mess with her. She was Richard Alexander's wife. They knew who she was, and managed to get Gandhi to safety with some police officers. They then took Gandhi to a nearby home, which was a friend of his. The crowd followed. Richard Alexander met them there, and the crowd were really angry still. They still wanted to kind of cause violence and threats towards him. Richard Alexander was quite a cunning man and come up with a plan to dress Gandhi in a police uniform, smuggle him outside the back of the house, and then told the mob at the front of the house that he's not there. If they want, they can volunteer someone to come in and check the house. They did. They went in there. Gandhi wasn't there. All the while he was being smuggled to the nearby police station in Durban, and that's where they stayed for the next few days until the crowd and the mobs and the riots dispersed. So that is now the story that I know about Richard, Jane and Gandhi and the incident in South Africa. And it's only been over the past couple of months that now we know that story, and my family in Hastings know that. But all the while, millions and millions of people across India and South Africa knew that story. It sums us up. It really does sum us up. And it's just been a really proud moment for me exploring this, and it's been for a couple of years now, and I still don't know what's next. There's various options. Someone's encouraging me to write short stories and for it to be translated into Hindi. There's potential for us to meet again as a group, maybe in India or even in America. There's various kind of options that potentially could happen for this, and charity work that I've been asked to do as well. And it's all stems back to me being curious about a piece of my family history. And I would always encourage you guys, if there's anything that you are curious about around your family, to explore it, because you never know where it might end up. Thank you.